G'day and welcome to this first session of PASS Virtual Summit 2020. I'm Hamish Watson. Today we're going to do a panel discussion on PowerShell. I've got a collection of my good mates from all around the world to talk to us today about PowerShell. Now, just a reminder, please throw your questions into the chat window, which is somewhere around there, and we'll see them. We'll talk about them. Who knows, we might even answer them. Alrighty, as I said, I'm Hamish Watson. I'm going to kind of run the show. Not really. I've met some of these people. I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand. I've been using PowerShell for ages. I learned it when I kind of did infrastructure things. And I'm going to introduce my good friend, Rob Sill. Rob, do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Hello, I am Rob. You can find me as SQL DBA with a beard, and you can ask me questions about PowerShell because I've been doing PowerShell for at least 10 minutes. At least 10 years, I think it is probably now.
So you started when you were 15? Brilliant.
Yeah, that's right.
Quick learner.
I love you,
Nice.
brother.
Brandon, do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm a vice president in a financial company. I'm not actually allowed to say the name, but I've been using PowerShell for almost as long as Rob has, and I couldn't survive without it. I have an environment that's measured in over six petabytes of data, with 200 new databases being created per week. We have over 24,000 of them. And we have a team of 4 to manage that. So automating everything that we can, absolutely critical.
There's a lot of databases.
It is.
I'll come back to you on that. Greg, g'day.
Morning.
Do you want to introduce?
Sure. Morning, all. Thanks for having me. As you can tell, I'm in my car. Long story, mix up on scheduling, but I'm here, loving it. I've not been using PowerShell as much as these folks. I tried it about 10 years ago, ran into issues, gave up, came back to about 4 years ago, and just absolutely fell in love with it. I'm a consultant, so I call myself DBA with other duties as assigned, and a lot of these days is writing PowerShell. I'm working on an ETL process for one of my clients and stuff like that. So I actually write very little T-SQL these days and do almost everything in PowerShell. And like I said, absolutely loving it.
That's fantastic. And look, mate, thank you so much for doing this, even though,
Hey, if you can get up at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m., I can get up for this. And with this crowd, hey, I feel lucky to be with this crowd. So thanks.
Nice. Now, I'm not sure. I think our Zoom link has been hacked because there's Ben Miller, someone. I don't know who this is. What's going on? Ben, do you want to unmute yourself? Say g'day. It's been a long time since I've seen you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm Ben Miller. I've been using PowerShell since it came out. I was at Microsoft when it came out. It was really fun to watch it evolve, and now it's evolved a lot, as Rob and others can do to attest. There's so much to do, but I've become a PowerShell DBA, and I love doing it every day. Actually, I use PowerShell every day to do lots and lots of things to keep me from having to type or click or things like that. So yeah, that's my world.
Nice. So here's the deal. I've heard about this PowerShell thing. I'm a purist DBA. I write beautiful T-SQL. I live in Management Studio all day, every day. If I could read my emails in Management Studio, I would. I might be just looking at Azure Data Studio. That's as far as I'm going to go out of my comfort zone. What's one thing that you'd actually say to, that purist DBA? Might be slightly grumpy. I don't know. I might be generalizing or making that up. But what would you say? Why should I get on this PowerShell journey? Anyone?
All right. I'll I'll jump in here. And the reason you should jump on it is because you're probably spending a lot of time doing mundane tasks that really you don't need to be spending as much time on. PowerShell, investing a little bit of time up front to write a PowerShell script can save you a ton of time afterwards.
Yeah, if I can jump in with a real world example I just had. As a consultant, I go into a lot of companies and who knows what they have. So in this case, we had probably a dozen servers and they wanted to know who all the jobs were assigned to, because as you know, if you don't assign the job to an SA or something like that, not SA, but when that person leaves the company, the job might stop running. And sure enough, wrote a quick script, maybe 5 lines, got an email that showed me every server and every job in that server that was assigned to an individual user, so we could reassign that to someone. And if I had to do that through SMS Studio, I'd still be doing that and wouldn't be here today. So automation like that, and this was a dozen servers. If you've got 200, you've got to automate.
So my favorite way of explaining it is to ask the T-SQL people, how do you tell the last time a DBCC check DB was successfully run against your user database? So Hamish, how do you do that with T-SQL?
Sorry, what?
How do you find out when the last time the successful DBCC check DB was run for your user database?
Oh, look, mate, I'm onto it. I use Ola Hellegren scripts, the maintenance scripts.
Cool.
I run those. I'm now going to go and check the log that's generated. I might chuck it into a table, and I'm going to do that across my 1,000 servers. Just give me a couple of days, mate. I'll be back soon.
So if you were just doing it in T-SQL for one database, what would you do, Brandon?
Well, it's not very easy to do unless you are manually logging. What happens when someone runs that outside of Ola Hallengren scripts and there is no log of it? You may not know. You could use you could use system functions. Yeah, it's not
DBCC
fun.
info with the
Yeah,
database
DB
name.
info.
But that's about it.
But then it's going to come down at line 53 or 47. Yep. And some versions of SQL Server, there's actually 2 because there's a strange bug and you got to work out which one's which, right? So that's okay. So you can do that for each database. So maybe you could use some undocumented for each database commands to be able to loop through all of those and get your results back and do your parsing. Or you could, now you've got to do it against all of the instances in your estate. How many instances have you got, Brandon?
1,800.
So 1,800. So you've got to run that 1,800 times and gather all
Yep.
the results and bring it all back. Or you could run get-dba last good checkup or last good DBCC and pass in your instances and it will go, here you go. Now for 1,800 instances, it's going to take a long time because Correct. It's got to run and connect to each of them. Yeah. But it's literally one line of code.
Unless
you
use
put that into an Excel sheet, no worries.
PowerShell.
We'll just pipe that into export Excel, boof, done. That to me shows the power of why, as a DBA in this world where you're looking after multiple hundreds, thousands of instances and hundreds of thousands of databases, you want to use automation like PowerShell to be able to connect through to them.
Yeah, but Rob, what version PowerShell am I going to use?
Which version of PowerShell?
Yeah.
Can I start with, it depends.
Yes, it's obligatory.
Yes.
So I would say you use the latest version that is available to be put on the machine that you can use to connect to your SQL instances. So if you're in a place which is highly secure and you're not allowed to install anything without a whole load of process, then you're probably going to be on the Windows version, which hopefully, if you're using a modern operating system, is going to be Windows PowerShell 5 or 5.1. Perfectly acceptable. If you are able to, I would say that you would install PowerShell. So the naming is a little bit weird here, but PowerShell version 7, because it's quicker. And because it's got a few extra bits that are available to you there. But it's also backward compatible as well. So anything that you can run on your Windows PowerShell, you're going to be able to run on your PowerShell 7.
Alrighty. I want to embrace the cloud. I've heard that there's PowerShell in the cloud. Am I able to take the same scripts that I'm using, that I'm using for, say, my on-premises SQL Server? I've decided to use PowerShell for that. I would now want to use, let's say, Azure. What do I do? Am I able to use those same scripts, or do I need to learn another version of PowerShell? Is it version, like Azure SQL Database is version 12. So do I need to learn Azure? What do I need to do?
It depends.
Uh-huh.
I mean, what are those scripts that you want to take from your on-premise environment doing?
I use some PowerShell to provision my database, to set a few things up. So if I am going to move to, say, the cloud, and I'm talking about platform as a service here and software as a service, not infrastructure as a service, or am I? No, let's go. I'm assuming that if I use, say, infrastructure as service, I spin up my own VM, Windows. We'll get to Linux soon. That I can port most of my scripts, right? But if I want to use, say, Azure, and I want to provision databases up there, can I use the same script? What version PowerShell do I use in Azure?
The reality is, just like any other platform, is you need to use the PowerShell script or the PowerShell modules that pertain to that platform. So we have a lot of things in DBA tools that do things for databases, and a lot of those can still be used against Azure SQL DB, right? But provisioning a database is very different than you provision a database on premises, right? But you can leverage PowerShell in that there's an AZ PowerShell module that has all the stuff you need to do to provision things, and the portal even gives you a template if you'd like to save that template and execute that template to provision it. So the big deal about PowerShell for me is reusability. I can do anything once by clicking my way through it. I can reuse anything one time, and then I have to provision 100 databases, and then I start going, well, maybe I don't want to click that much, or maybe I don't want to wait for everything to run that way, or maybe I want to provision in parallel. And so it becomes a lot more difficult when you're using traditional clicking. I've never parallelized my click. I haven't. I've tried. It's just not going to happen, right? So don't try to parallelize a click in Management Studio or any otherwise, because it's gonna be painful. So that's the big thing for me is reusability.
Yep. Nice.
So what I would add to that, Hamish, is that if you have already got the skills to be able to write that PowerShell is transferable. Those knowledge is transferable. You can go and run that against VMware. You can work out how to run things against Hyper-V, against Azure, against AD. It doesn't matter. As long as you can use get command to find a command, you can use get help to find out how to run a command. That literally is all you need. But if you use get member as well, then you can work out what you're getting. Once you understand that, you can write your PowerShell. It doesn't matter what technology you're connecting to, you can use those skills to write PowerShell against that technology.
Yeah, I really want to jump on that if I can. For example, I mentioned the ETL I'm writing where I have to use SFTP to download a script and then GPG to decrypt it. And all this is in PowerShell. And just as Rob said, hey, I knew some PowerShell. There's got to be a PowerShell module for this. Let me go out, find it, download it, do get command, get member, all that, figure out what to do. And again, it's the power of once you understand, here's the way PowerShell works. Everything else is just what command do I need to do to make it happen, regardless of what the platform is, T-SQL or, AD, SFTP, GPG, and all that fun stuff. So it really has unlocked a lot of possibilities for me that before would have been much more complicated to do.
Nice. Now, Ben, Now, to everyone else, I promise you this is not scripted. Because Ben, you mentioned a word, and I was going to talk about it at some stage. DBA tools. You mentioned it. What is it?
So DBA Tools is a module that has morphed long ago from Christine Lemaire, who started it as a migration tool for her to migrate lots and lots and lots of servers. Because again, you don't want to click through those because migrations from one to the other can get pretty painful, copying logins and jobs. And so it began that way. So that part of the tool is seriously robust. It's used for a lot of good and by a lot of people. So DBA Tools is a module that contains over 500 commands. It's written by people in the community. It's an open source project that she started that allowed us to participate. I've written several functions for it, but it basically consolidates commands that you would use against a database, against a server, into one module that you can get off the PowerShell gallery by using install-module DBA Tools. And once you have that thing in your hand, you have a powerful tool that has over 500 commands that you can just use. You didn't have to write them. You didn't have to know how to script. You just run the command with the right parameters and bam, you're done. So it's pretty slick.
Nice.
Use it every day.
I promote anything with short URLs because I don't like typing. So I promote T-SQL because it's tsql.org. The thing I love about DBA Tools, wait for it, dbatools.io. Done. Thank you so much. Sorry, Rob, you were going to say something, mate.
That was actually me, I think.
Oh, sorry, Brandon.
I was just going to say, for anyone who is interested in getting into PowerShell, DBA Tools is actually, in my opinion, a great way to start learning PowerShell. Because as you know, you said, there's you just run these commands. You just pass them a few parameters. There's enough stuff in there that you're going to be running into tests just as part of your normal duties in your job, where a single command from DBA Tools can save you a whole bunch of time. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Alrighty. Here's a question for you. How do I start learning PowerShell?
Well, just so happens I've got a presentation at 2 p.m. Eastern time on PowerShell for DBA beginners. So, you know, I'm not saying it's the best one out there, but I think it's pretty decent. And there was a pre-con that I think a certain person here did this earlier this week. So you may have missed that, but I think that should be available to download if you signed up for pre-cons or something like that. I don't know how that works, but a lot of tools out there.
And I have a session on Friday if you want to wait till then, to Friday at 10:30. That's PowerShell for DBA as well. So there's plenty of ways to learn. The big deal is you have to start. If you never start using a tool, you'll never get good at the tool. So get in the car, start it, and then push on the gas and drive it. Because the PowerShell engine is too compelling, in my opinion, to let go. It's just too compelling. I've heard many DBAs say, yeah, no, it's not for me. It's not really useful. I'm not a scripter guy. And man, what a miss out. That's for me. It's just a miss out. You missed it. So yeah, get started.
Yeah, I'm already in the car.
Yeah. Greg's in the car, so we're good.
This is really amazing. So you're all doing sessions on PowerShell.
Yeah, we all are.
That is a brilliant.
Yeah, that works.
Yep.
Oh wow! I'm so glad I got. Yeah, that's great that you're on this panel discussion. That you're doing.
Hi, Hamish. Hi, Hamish.
Sorry, Eric. I would add to what everybody said is there are some excellent books that you should start, and the absolute best one that you start with is called Learn PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. And there's a couple of versions now. There's the original version for Windows PowerShell, and there's also a version specifically for PowerShell Core. So PowerShell that will run on a Mac or on a Unix box. So remember now, PowerShell is cross-platform. Anybody can use it, and those are really great places to start. Sorry, Eric.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So, Hamish, we have a couple questions here. And one of them is, what PowerShell module do you consider indispensable for DBAs that isn't DBA tools, DBA checks, or import in Excel?
So I'll jump on this and say the SQL Server module that was developed by Microsoft. You're gonna, if you're not using DBA tools, you're definitely going to be using that one to interface with SQL Server. There are some other modules that I use. DBA checks is another one made by the same folks who make DBA tools. But I also tend to get into stuff around VMware for virtualization. Pure Storage has commandlets. Pick a vendor. There's a good chance they have commandlets for you. But the two main ones that I use for working with SQL Server are the SQL Server module and dbatools.io.
Yep, I'll second that. SQL Server module has got some things that the DBA tools module. I don't know if that's true anymore. I mean, there's over 500 commands. I think there's pretty good overlap. I'm not sure there's tons that the SQL Server module does that the DBA tools module doesn't. But the one piece of the SQL Server module I find indispensable is the provider. So I give sessions on the provider all the time, and the SQL Server provider is, in my opinion, a classic piece of work that gives you a lot of leg up. That's just path commands and removal and traversal of the object explorer type thing, just like file explorer, becomes indispensable. And the other one that I'd put as a sister there is Posh RS Job by Boprox. That gives me the ability to parallelize things, not paralyze them, parallelize them. And it gives me, I just used it the other day for a load test. I just fired up 25 threads and ripped it. I'm just query, and each instance or thread fired off its own queries, all it wanted. And I just ran one command and it just threaded it for me. So to me, those two, that's in my toolbox.
So I will add, obviously, the ones everybody else has said, but also Pesta. I love Pesta because I like to validate that my environment is as I expect it. And Pesta, Hamish will like this. It's a unit testing framework for PowerShell. So you can write it to make sure that your PowerShell runs correctly. But actually, because Pesta will test anything that PowerShell can get, you can use it to validate anything PowerShell can connect to. So I really love doing that. And all of the AZ dot modules. So if you're connecting to anything to do with Azure, I'm doing a lot of work in Azure at the moment, then and all the AZ dot modules are ones that are indispensable to me at the moment.
And of course, the SSRS commandlets as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The reporting tool service module. Yep. Super good.
Nice.
Well, one of the things I was going to say, Hamish, about, why would I learn it? I've noticed that as PowerShell has become a lot more robust or mature, you might call it mature more than robust. It's always been robust, so I'm not worried about that. But the vendors, the storage vendors and the cloud vendors, I mean, there's PowerShell commandlets for all of them. AWS PowerShell, super awesome module that you can use to do anything to do most everything in AWS. The AZ module for Azure, even Google has one for GCP. That you just can't ignore the adoption by vendors. Pure PowerShell, VMware has a PowerShell interface. I mean, all the big vendors that you're going to play with are all going to have PowerShell modules to control their infrastructure. You just can't ignore that. It's a beautiful thing. Use it once in one platform and use your knowledge to transfer into the other stuff that you do every day. It's a beautiful thing, and they're all reusable.
I think that sort of leads into the next question, and I think y'all have pretty much answered this in a way. But we're obviously on the panel. We're all pro SQL. Do you see PowerShell being a requirement for a DBA in their career?
Yes.
Yes.
I will not hire a DBA today if they do not have PowerShell experience.
It's huge.
I'm going to say it depends. And that might shock people. But for Brandon, it makes absolute sense. 1,800 instances, 9,073,000 databases. But if you're looking after one big monolithic database, it's half a petabyte in size, and your responsibility as a DBA is to make sure that that works, then you probably don't need PowerShell. But if you don't learn PowerShell, I think you're restricting your possibilities for later in your career.
And jumping in here as a consultant, I think, again, my job varies. One day I'm running T-SQL, another day I'm running SRS, stuff like that. So to me, I think if you're going into a field where you're jumping from one thing to another, you're not doing just, say, the 1 terabyte, one database, doing nothing else. You have to add it to your toolbox. So that's my thought.
Absolutely. Alrighty. We talked about PowerShell quite a bit. We've talked about writing PowerShell, but what IDE do you use to write PowerShell?
Good question.
Yeah,
Actually,
That's a great question.
with some of the
I didn't make
others here
that
on the
question
panel
up.
area.
Someone else did.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, for me, I have several. I've paid for one for a certain specific reason, and now the other things are putting out the same functionality. So Azure Data Studio is a good one. If you're going to interact with SQL at the same time, it's nice to have that. Visual Studio Code, ISE, I don't use anymore just because it's not
Finished.
as awesome as the other ones. They don't have notebooks in them. Yeah, just some things. But yeah, the Azure Data Studio and Visual Studio Code are great options. I'm sure there's several others. Those are where I find most of my time is actually spent in.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Ben on this one. Visual Studio Code, Azure Data Studio. One of the key things that I need in any IDE is the ability to connect to source control, right? Because if we're creating these scripts, we're making changes to them. Yes, we absolutely want to make sure that we're properly using source control, and we've got a development framework that we're working with.
I'm going to jump in. I'm old school for a variety of reasons. I still use ISE quite a bit, but I agree with Brandon that source control is mandatory. So I'll use ISE and then just go to the PowerShell command line and do my Git commands to commit everything. But like all these folks, I've worked with Visual Code and stuff like that. I've actually thought about my next article being just, hey, what environment? But I'll point out too, you can write the code in Notepad if you really need to, or Vim or Emacs if you really want to, and save it and execute it within the PowerShell environment. So you don't need a specific tool. If I'm doing a 2-line script, I'm not going to bring out Visual Studio. But if I'm writing, 100 line with 5 functions, certainly I'm going to go with one of the better IDEs for that.
Absolutely. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And that's the point. If you just need to write 2 or 3 lines, then use Notepad, use Notepad++, whatever. It's not a problem. Use Word, it's fine. But if you actually want to really write PowerShell and test it, then I would say to use the IDE that the PowerShell team themselves use, where they are creating the extensions that are there, that has everything built in to help you to write your code. If you write your PowerShell code in Visual Studio Code, then you can write it, and then you look at the bottom, there'll be a little tab that says problems, and you click on that problems, and it'll show you, oh, hang on a minute, you've missed a curly brace, or you've used an alias, don't use aliases, or lots of linting things just built into the IDE because it realizes it's a PowerShell script. So that would be my opinion.
And for the beginners, there's IntelliSense, right? I mean, that's one of the big pieces of even the ISE has IntelliSense. If the module's loaded, it will tell you what you need to do. So that's how you break in, right? Is you use it.
Hey, IntelliSense is for the people who've been doing it for a long time as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, not just for beginners.
True. I'm just trying to give people a break into how do I get into this
Fair
thing?
enough.
Why? What? It's a nice tool. I still love IntelliSense.
I couldn't
Things
live
I'm
without
not
it.
familiar with. It's awesome.
Yep.
It absolutely is. And if you're a beginner, then the reason I would say that you get used to IntelliSense, even just at the command line, is because then you know you've written the command correctly.
Yeah.
Because if you tab it and it changes case to camel case, or it completes for you, you know that you've written a command that is valid.
Yep. Exactly.
Alrighty. If you could have one feature in PowerShell tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, man. Wow.
Great question.
Well, you pulled that one out.
Yeah, I didn't think it up. This was Thomas who asked.
I've got to admit, I thought about that question before this session because I thought someone would ask it, and I couldn't think of anything. And I'm going to say why is because PowerShell, I found almost every time I've wanted to do something, there's a way to do it. And that's kind of surprised me because I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And I look up, oh, I can do that in PowerShell. So off the top of my head, there might be easier ways to do things, but I found pretty much anything I want to do in PowerShell is already there. And oftentimes there's multiple ways of doing it, which is really powerful. So I'm going to give that thought because I really want a better answer one of these days, but I can't think of anything.
I can think of
All right. So one of the things that does get me about PowerShell is sometimes the messages it gives you around error reporting, etc., are not as robust as they could be, or as helpful as I would like. Sometimes those errors actually get kind of suppressed and a generic message layered on top of, and that can be painful.
So I've got two. I think I would like, which order? Let's do it this way around. I would like to be able to use PowerShell to interact with the file system with hundreds of thousands of files and it not be mind-numbingly slow. So if there's an improvement to that, that would be something I would love. And secondly, perhaps something that's not in PowerShell itself, but it's consistency. So I would like there to be more intake of PowerShell, let's say within Microsoft or within any vendor, to bring things in and actually follow the consistent good practices, do good error handling, use confirm and what if correctly, so that we have a consistent environment throughout the whole of PowerShell. Because I think sometimes people find it confusing because it works like this over here, but then you go to the AZ modules and they've got something different. So those would be my two wishes. And yes, I have told the PowerShell team those.
That's a great point, Rob, because there's also when you talk about verbs, originally if you wanted to add a new instance of something like a new database or something, it would be like add dash, and then at some point they introduced new as a verb. And for those that don't know, PowerShell follows a verb noun syntax when naming commandlets. So that creates some kind of confusion. I'd like to see that consolidated as well.
Brandon, you remind me in my presentation, I comment on that where I'm doing where object and pointing out that where is not really a verb, but we're going to treat it like a verb for this commandlet because what else are you going to do?
But also
it's approved, so you should be able to use it.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
There are a set of standards to follow. So it's actually already written down. It's documented when you should use which one on the Microsoft documentation site. I've just put the link into the discussion, but even Microsoft don't follow it within their teams. So these are the things that drive me.
Alrighty. Here's a technical question for you. When would you break up pipelined commands into separate commands, saving the results into a variable?
Yeah, the big thing for me is going to be about the size of the pipeline. So when you start putting an elephant size things over the pipeline, I mean, you're making copies of those as you go, and that can be pretty impactful to your working set size in your PowerShell window. And if you're going to run that on the SQL server, you're just going to take and make memory pressure happen so that SQL has to give memory back. So to me, it's really about how you pipeline, not whether you pipeline. If you pipeline well with Streamlined, even if it's a little larger and you where clause it enough to whittle it down, just like a select statement, you want to get it smaller as you go right. If it gets bigger as you go right, you're probably doing it wrong, and you'll pay for it in the end. But that's what if it's going to be a large result set, I'd probably break them up into variables and deal with them.
I think Ben's got a great point. I also would say, because I've seen this, readability. I've seen you can write some very cryptic code with a lot of pipelining and then come back 6 months later and be like, who wrote this code? Oh, I wrote it. What am I doing here? So again, readability can be just as important in a lot of cases, if even when you're not worried about the size of the elephant, so to speak.
But remember that show way back when called Name That Tune? And I can name that tune in 2 notes, and you're like, shut up. And we get stuck in the realm of I can do that command in one line. And oh, that's so cool. But you can't read it. You can't make heads or tails what it's actually doing. And then most of the time you get confused anyway. So if it's going to get too big and too long for pipelining, you probably should break it up.
Nice. Alrighty. Here's a good question, and I actually faced this myself at a client site. I found a creative way to get around it, but I can't divulge what or why I did it. Here's the question. From a company's security and software quality assurance, how does DBA tools work since it's open source and not a Microsoft product? What do I do?
So it's open source, so you can see all of the code that is deployed to the PowerShell gallery, because you can go to GitHub and you can read it. It's a lot. It's 140,000 lines of code, I think, but it's all there. Secondly, you're thinking, well, okay, that shows me what it is on GitHub, and I get it from the PowerShell gallery. How do I know that these are the same? Well, one way you could just download it from GitHub, of course, but the other way is that we sign every release of DBA tools that goes to the PowerShell gallery. So we use a signing certificate, and 4 people have access to the password for that. And every time we do a release for DBA tools to the gallery, all of the code is signed and sent through. So that means that you know that the code, when you download it from the PowerShell gallery, is the code that we ran through the build for from GitHub. Secondly, when it's coming to security teams, it's approved, it's used by Microsoft. We have a lot of interaction with the Microsoft team. Microsoft gave us their SMO to include with the module. So there are a lot of things there, but also go to dbatools.io/security. It's a nice short URL so that Hamish can remember it. But that will give you all of the details that you need for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. Right, Ben, this one's probably for you, mate. How do I parallelize, not paralyze, parallelize PowerShell executions?
Yeah, so I mean, you can do it in PowerShell 7. They have a dash parallel for the for each, so you can do some things automatically in the old school of 5.1. I use PoshRS job. So PoshRS job is the extension of RS or of jobs. There is a run command dash as job, and it will put it in a job. Jobs will run PowerShell executable each time a job runs. Parallelizing through PoshRS job uses run spaces. That's what the RS stands for, is run spaces. So really, if I were to parallelize something, I would do it through PoshRS job, as I've done this last little while, just because if I can get it to run in one PowerShell.exe space and not each job getting a PowerShell.exe, I can control how much memory and how much space it uses. Plus, I can interact with each other. So that's how I do it, is with PoshRS job. You can just, it's an install dash module as well. It's on the PowerShell gallery. So it's PoshRS and you just install that module, and it has not very many commands, but it's all about parallelizing.
Nice. Greg, here's a question for you. You spoke about ETL to call PowerShell scripts. If I'm having issues with scheduling an SSIS task, i.e. ETL, where it can't find the path to PowerShell, what could I do to resolve this?
I'll be honest, I haven't worked from that side of SAS. When I talk about ETL, I've done the ETL directly within PowerShell. So, download it, extract it, and moved into Excel or whatever format. But generally, what I found in cases like that is it works for me, but doesn't work when I try to run it. That's because the service doesn't have that path or permissions on that path. I just had that issue recently with ETL I've written. It worked great, set up as a scheduled task, and the counter was running under the scheduled task, didn't have the right path. So once I fixed the path permissions, everything worked. So that's the first place I would look. But you can always hit me up on Twitter also with more questions on that, because I always like solving problems like that.
Brilliant. Brandon, I've got a question for you, mate. What is your standard for a DBA with experience with PowerShell? Able to get, around and understand how to call, find commands, writing modules and functions? Or is there a line between DBA that knows PowerShell or PowerShell developer writing stuff for databases? Where's the line?
So when I look at, let's first start off what I expect a DBA to be able to do with PowerShell. I don't expect a DBA to necessarily be, a full-blown master of PowerShell, but I expect them to be able to, write simple scripts, use commands. Anything beyond that, they can be taught, right? You can teach skill, but you cannot teach that passion. If they've gone out and they put in effort to learn and to grow, absolutely, I will give them every resource in the world to, up their game there. As far as PowerShell developers specifically, I don't really know if that's an actual role in and of itself. Typically, the way people get into PowerShell is they're using some product, whether that's SQL Server, VMware, or even, a SAN storage admin, and they're looking for ways to automate tasks around that. So it's an additive to their skill set. But as far as the DBA, I really just want to know that they're familiar enough and they can work around it, and that they've built a few simple scripts. If they've done that, then we'll go from there.
Nice, brilliant. Rob, I'm going to read this question nicely.
Okay, thank you.
Could you hurry up with learn DBA tools in a month of lunches, please? No, I'm kidding. How's it?
Was that a question?
Nah.
I was
Rob.
just
So look-
using his power.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. So Manning are our publishers, and they said, "Hey, Chrissy and Rob, will you write this book?" And we said yes. And after we'd written a few chapters, they released it as a MEEP, so that you have access to it as we write it, because they believed that we were going to finish it, and we believed we were going to finish it as well. Then the world took a turn that was very, very peculiar. And to be honest, Chrissy and I both found it very hard to actually concentrate on writing. And there's been a break. We are now back into writing. There are more chapters coming through the process. I was looking at some at the weekend that Chrissy's written, so they will be coming through. And I promise you, Manning are aware. They're making sure that we're moving forward and giving us all of the help we can get, and we will have more chapters out regularly, and the book will be finished about this long.
Yep.
I'm not going to set a date, but it will be finished.
We thank you, Rob, because some of us did buy the MEAP. Just saying. Just get
Yep.
your butt in gear, buddy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Come on, mate.
My money at
Well-
work, my friend. It's all good.
We love you, Rob. Right. Here's a trick question for you. Are there any actions or functions you would not use PowerShell and that SSMS is the better option?
Does anyone have to think about that question at all?
I just wanted to see what your answer would be.
What would I use Management Studio instead of DBA tools for?
This is
Man,
the
that-
reaction I thought I'd get, just with less swearing.
I was muted.
Man, that's a great question. Nope, I got nothing.
I could potentially see a scenario where, and this shouldn't really happen, but a new feature comes out and there's no, the PowerShell commandlets aren't really robust yet for it, or they don't exist. In that case, sure, but PowerShell just becomes more and more of my working space as time goes by, not less.
Standard reports. Sometimes it's nice to be able to right click and go to the standard reports and show somebody who likes to see pretty pictures, here is the disk space or the table space available, or those sort of things. Now, sure, I can do that in PowerShell into Excel and create a chart and all of those things. Oh, I might be doing a presentation about that in an hour or so. But sometimes if you just need to be able to do it straight away, then that's perhaps the thing that I would use the most. Same reason that I would use Azure Data Studio to use the Manage tab and to pull up some of the graphs, because let's face it, people like to see pretty pictures.
I have one, Query Store.
Yep.
You just don't have that same pretty regret. I mean, you can do queries, you could even write commandlets to do that. But the reality is, like Rob said, sometimes seeing that little graphy thing that says, here's your regress queries, or here's your top resource consuming, and you can click and click and you can see the things below as you click. It's pretty hard to top when you start, managing things in Query Store and forcing plans. Yes, you can do a lot of things with commands, but not so quite the same. So
I think Ben and Rob actually put a very serious answer on what was going to be my half joking answers. When my boss is looking over the shoulder because they want to see pretty charts. But Query Store was the one that came to mind. And I would argue too, that's a good use because, as we mentioned, PowerShell is great for automation. I want to automate 1,800 servers or something. But Query Store, I'm typically looking at a specific problem on a specific database and a specific server. So having a nice graphical interface, I can see what my queries are doing. I think SMS is still a very good tool for that. If I want to extract it across 100 servers, yeah, I'm going to write a PowerShell script. But 9 times out of 10, I'm looking at a specific server, and I want that nice bar chart or whatever I'm looking at to say, hey, this query got better or it got worse.
So in the discussion, there's a great comment. Shane O'Neill says, I use SSMS for interacting with data and PowerShell for dealing with those interactions. And I think that's a good way of looking at it as well.
I like that.
That is an awesome way of looking at it.
Yeah.
All righty. So before, Rob, when I was only half listening, I don't think no one noticed. You used an example about DBCC, right? Where, how do I find out, you know, all the servers DBCC has run on? But let's flip it around. Which database on which server hasn't had a DBCC run within the past week? How would I do that?
So you would use DBHX. So DBHX is, if DBA Tools was Chrissy's pet project, then DBHX was definitely mine. I was always for validating my environment. And in DBHX, you can decide how frequently you must have had your DBCC check run. And then you can set that as a configuration item and run it against your estate every time. And then you will find out which databases have not had it run because they will fail the tests.
Nice. So in the discussion, there was some talk about setting up replication, because you can query replication. And yeah, I thought that is such a great question for William Durkin.
This is recorded, right? Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah,
just so that it is absolutely on record that William Durkin promised that he would get replication into DBA Tools. Of course, he didn't give a time when he would do that, but he has promised to do it. So if you would like replication in support in DBA Tools, then William Durkin, Andy Mallon, all of these people are the ones that do it. It's important to realize DBA Tools is open source and it's written by volunteers. So we could only write what we knew and what we did. So in the very beginning, we just wrote the commands that we knew how to do. And then gradually people with more and more expertise in different areas within SQL Server brought their knowledge through, and the number of commands that we've got expanded. It's just nobody's taken the jump to do replication, and that's because of the way it's handled in .NET. It's a different, there's a different way of handling it.
Well, good. And just a reminder to people, you know, keep chucking the questions through. Otherwise, I'm just going to make stuff up. Alrighty. One of the problems I have at times is remote execution of PowerShell, because some companies turn off, you know, WinRM, what have you. So this question, so when using remote sessions in PowerShell, do any of you feel comfortable using CRED SSP, or do you avoid that?
I personally don't set it up unless I have a need to. It's helpful, but it's, I don't know that there's, from my perspective, I don't know if there's a huge value in that. I mean, I guess you could, but some people don't like it for security reasons. But for me, it's a mixed bag. If I really feel compelled, I'll set it up. If not, then I deal with the regular, normal way of doing things with Windows authentication and other credentials.
The security teams in most enterprises are going to block that anyway, is going to be my response. If it gets you around the hurdle and you have approval to do it, then, you know, Okay, because if it gets you around the hurdle and you can do the thing that you need to do, then probably your security team haven't locked it down properly anyway. So, you know, avoid it if you can.
Yeah, I generally try to avoid it for the reasons that have been listed. Every company is going to be a little different, but most companies aren't going to let you do that.
I assume we haven't played with it, so no comment here.
All good. Right. Way back in the past, I mentioned a little bit about Linux, right? So PowerShell, Linux, best mates or schoolyard enemies?
We heart penguins.
Yeah. So PowerShell was written originally by developers who came from a Unix background. So it has always come from people who have a deep understanding of how Unix works. And the fact that they get it to work on Unix, I can tell you that the PowerShell developers generally work in Macs.
Yeah,
So they're not running Windows when they're writing PowerShell. The new PowerShell 7, they're running Macs. PowerShell absolutely loves Linux. And apart from anything that calls the Windows 32 API, it's going to work the same way on a Windows machine as on a Mac, as on a Unix box.
Yeah, I actually had an interesting incident happen to me. One of the articles I wrote, someone put a comment saying, "This doesn't work. Why is it not working?" And I realized it's a PowerShell GUI to make it just a clock in PowerShell for the fun of it. Something using GUI is not going to run on Linux, and it never dawned on me that, oh, I should caveat. This is one of those few examples. But like my demo today, to make most of it happen, I actually spin up 4 Docker Linux installs and do all my stuff against Linux from a Windows machine. You can also, from Linux, run against Windows SQL servers. So that interoperability is a huge win where you're not thinking about, oh, what platform am I on? Oh, I have to write a script for this platform. Oh, I have to write it for this platform. You write a script and you run it against your platforms. And other than the few caveats, like Rob said, it just works. And I just absolutely love that.
Brilliant. So what I'm picking up here is their best mates. Nice.
Yeah.
As good as
Right.
New Zealand and the US, Hamish.
Okay, you made me speechless, but no worries, mate. That's the first. Well done. Here's a good question. And Rob, I'm going to throw it your way, mate. How long do each of you estimate that it takes to break even using PowerShell? In other words, assuming it takes, I don't know, X hours to learn PowerShell, how long do you think it takes to recover those X hours? Must be an accountant asking this.
So I can give a practical example, a real world example here.
Okay.
So at a company I worked at, there was an issue around a cloning process that was actually run in PowerShell, but would occasionally break somewhere in the virtualization layer. It was cloning from one environment to a lower level environment. Every time this would happen, a DBA would have to get up and they'd spend 2-3 hours in the middle of the night fixing this thing. But the steps were always the same. So once those steps were documented, there was essentially a guide to build a series of commandlets to actually resolve that issue in an automated fashion. So it took about a month to run it through a full development process, test it, all of that. But at the end of that, it was a savings of 6 hours per week to the DBA team. So do the math there. It didn't take too long to see that benefit. Looks like Rob might want to say something.
In exactly the same way. So the reason I got into PowerShell was because I wanted to organize my digital photos. But when I went to work and I was a junior DBA, and my job every morning was to check the agent jobs. And this estate had 200 or so instances and no monitoring as such. So the way to check the jobs was to open Management Studio, connect to the instance, open the Explorer, connect to Job Activity Monitor, and look through and see that the jobs had succeeded and that there weren't any red crosses. So that's what the first part of my job as new boy was. So I was probably spending 2 or 3 hours every day doing that. So with PowerShell, I was like, we can do this better. So I'd started learning about it for the photos. I then took that, how do I work it into SQL Agent, and understood how to work with the SMO and get that back. And then I read about putting it into Excel sheets and color coding it. And then what we did was we ran a job at 6:30 every morning, which ran that script and created an Excel sheet and put it into a share and emailed the DBA team. And you clicked on the Excel sheet and you could just scroll through, and green is good, red is bad. And it took me less than 60 seconds then to check. So I went from 3 hours to 60 seconds. It probably took me 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks to get to a point to be able to do that. But when you suddenly have that extra amount of hours there and all the learning that you've done as you've gone through building up that solution, that is then just applied, you know, I can't imagine how exponentially that time that I spent, that first time that I spent has helped me in the future.
I'm going to jump in with even less dramatic ones because I think those are great stories, great examples. In my case, I don't remember the first script, but it was something, again, iterated across a dozen servers. And very quickly I realized, you know, for each is my friend. For each server in server list, do this. And I think my first script maybe took me an hour to put together, and that was learning even where to Google PowerShell, and saved me a couple hours of time. So even the simplest stuff, start out simple. You don't have to automate an entire report like that, I think. Write your first script, say, hey, I just want to go to a dozen servers and get a list of databases. Do that as a practice. That'll take you maybe an hour to write if you Google just how to do it. But that'll get you in the frame of how can I start to automate things? How do I look at all my servers and everything like that? So yeah, the payback is a lot quicker than one can imagine, I think.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I the other concept from a DBA perspective is as soon as you, so anytime you're in Management Studio, you're doing row by agonizing row, right? I'm right clicking on a database. I'm right clicking on a table. As soon as you start doing it in a set-based theory, you've paid yourself back, right? Now I get I get the pertinent information from a list of databases instead of one by one. Do that in Management Studio. I want to go check the recovery model. I want to go check the compatibility level of each database on my server. In Management Studio, there are ways to do that that are tricky, but for the most part, you're going to right click on a database and then you're going to do properties and you're going to go into options and you're going to look. And that's handy. But what if I want to do that across servers now, right? And now you start paying yourself back with a little script you wrote. SMO is your friend or DBA tools is your friend. You just go get database and you point to a server instead of a database. And it gives you all of them with their properties and you just select them or where clause them or whatever. And then you've kind of broke even or even more broke even, more than broke even. So that's me. Set based or row based. You take your pick, but as soon as you go set based, you win.
And I might steal that analogy in the future if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just threw that out there.
Right about this time, I'm going to make one comment. It was halfway through the session that I realized Rob didn't have a mirror. Yeah, because his head went behind it. I was like, how do you do that? I can still see him. Anyway, good fangled technology, those mirrors. Right, Brandon, question for you, mate.
All right.
How does PowerShell perform in your environment with such a huge database? Have you hit some limits? Is there a performance impact? How do you go so big?
How do you go so big? Well, it's a combination of smaller scripts. I mean, you don't end up with a highly automated environment by building it all at once, right? So it's not just PowerShell that we're using. I can't talk too much about exactly what we implemented there, but we separate out concerns like collection of data from alerting or alerting on conditions within our environment, you know, checks, etc. What I can say is we bring everything into a central repository, and that is probably one of our largest databases at this point. Is just a central repository of everything happening in our environment that we can query against that. Beyond that, I really can't get too much into those details.
So I know when we first released DBHX, we've tested it on our own labs, and some people came back to us and said, "Oh no, it's a bit slow." And we went, "Oh, okay, what's happening?" Well, we're running it against an instance with 2,500 databases on it, and I'm like, "Yeah, it will be slow because we hadn't written it to be performant in that manner." So we've done some changes there, and SMO itself has issues with iterating through that number of databases. But we had people using DBHX on estates with over 10,000 instances on them. And we had them using it on estates with, like I said, instances with 2,500. It's going to take time. And once you get to that point, then you really need to think about how you are writing your PowerShell. It's no good just going get dash database and then running through all
of Rob, you just muted yourself.
No, I didn't. No. Zeke just muted me.
Yeah, it's gonna do. The cat did.
Yeah, there's no point just running through and iterating through that collection. You're going to have memory issues like we were talking about earlier when you're passing stuff down through the pipeline, and PowerShell is just not going to work in that way. You're going to have to really think about how you write your PowerShell and tune it in the same way as you would tune your SQL queries.
Mm-hmm.
All good. We've got about 8 minutes left. Whew! Righty. Rob, I think you answered this one, but if anyone else has some comment around this, do you add tests to make sure your automation does what you expect?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Pester, as Rob mentioned, is a great framework for that. Anytime you're writing any sort of code, whether it's automation or otherwise, it really is a good idea to use unit testing to validate functionality, especially after you've gone through a few iterations, right? You don't want to introduce a bug that's gonna cause an issue in your environment. We're a little more sensitive to this as DBAs than developers might be, but it's common, it's accepted in the development world, and it's definitely proper unit testing should be something that we do as well.
I'd also say that as well as unit testing for the code that you're writing, that if you imagine when we have a run book, when we are invoking DR and we break our availability group and we force our cluster to come back online and we bring all of our databases online and make sure everything works, we don't just do that and go, yeah, yes, they'll be fine. We do it and then we go back and we have a look. We make sure we've enabled all those agent jobs we need to have enabled. We make sure all of our databases are ready and that they're all consistent and valid. All our logins are there. We go and check all of those things. So if you're writing a PowerShell process that's going to automate that and save you time, and make sure you do the same thing every time, which is a good thing, then it makes perfect sense to use something like Pester to then automate the testing. Have I got everything that I expect as well? So I absolutely would.
Nice. Well, here's the deal. We got 5 minutes and there's 4 of you. So you've got 1 minute, 15 seconds each to, your last comments about your sessions. Why should someone come along? So I'm going to go, Greg, tell us about your session, mate.
Great. Thank you. My session is PowerShell for DBA beginners. I've really tried to make it a practical session with starting with a couple of simple scripts and build up to a script that'll let you push out a SQL script to multiple servers. So hopefully you can walk away with something like, hey, maybe that doesn't work for me, but I can take tools from that. I'm actually going to plug the other sessions also because I think Ben said he's got one on Friday. Just because mine's a beginner doesn't mean I've got the only way to teach you. So go to multiple sessions. You'll learn multiple ways. I saw a beginner session last week where I'm like, oh, I like that. I need to add that to my toolbox, something like that. So the more you can learn, if you're not learning PowerShell, honestly, you've got to be learning it. It's part of our toolbox. So have fun and learn what you can.
Nice. Ben, mate.
Yeah, I mean, my session is going to be about using PowerShell as a DBA. So I'm going to give a lot of examples where you use it and how you use it. So it's going to be a little bit further past the beginner part. My goal was to introduce people to why you'd use PowerShell, how you become a PowerShell DBA. And it's going to be very practical. The slide deck's not very big. Most of it's all demos. In PowerShell, it's really hard to talk about it on slides. For me, I'm not a slide guy, so I tend to dive into the code. So there'll be lots of code and fun to see why, to see what, and to see how.
Brilliant. Brandon.
All right. So on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern time, I will be talking about automating SQL Server deployments and configurations, how to solve problems like configuration drift using PowerShell desired state configuration.
Nice.
So as part of that, we'll be discussing infrastructure as code in depth and how this can help you to get better control of your environment.
Fantastic. And Rob, brother, what's your session?
So as everybody is aware, people, we like to think that all of our data is in databases and safely stored and backed up and all of that. But actually it's a complete lie because all of our data is in Excel. It's the truth. So I like to automate things. I like to use PowerShell. So my session in a couple hours, hour and a half, something like that, is about automating Excel and the wonderful things that you can do with that, including making pretty pictures for your managers.
Fantastic. Well, my session is on Terraform. Actually, my session is DevOps in the database. Basically, it's an hour of me writing bad code, creating some deployment pipelines. I do a little bit of Azure PowerShell. I do a bit of Azure CLI or command line stuff. And majority is introducing our database into a pipeline that's already using Terraform to provision stuff. The reason why I did that session was so that people could provision stuff, then tear it down, right? If you're setting up test environments and what have you. So yeah, that's my session. It's not really PowerShell related. But yeah, actually my first session at Summit 4 years ago, I used a whole heap of PowerShell. Yeah, it was awesome. And it worked. So there's that. Look, my friends, thank you so much for being a part of this. You all need to DM me your address so that I can ship you the kiwi chocolates. We had a deal.
Sweet.
So,
All right.
Yeah, it's all coming. And could you all sort the COVID thing out so we can catch up soon, please? because I miss y'all, especially you, Ben. I never know if you're I can't actually say it without swearing. I don't know if you take me seriously, and I hope you don't.
Hamish, you're a stud.
You're only human.
Hey everyone, well, thank you so much. You definitely are converting me. I'm gonna be checking out a couple of your guys' sessions, and I'll take Ben's advice. If you don't try, you have to get in there, get in the car, and start learning. I'll definitely, take that advice, man. Just wanted to remind everyone in the audience, go visit the expo hall. It's open right now, so go check out all our partners in there, what they have to offer, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Thank you so much. This was a great panel discussion.
Thank you.